I've been spending a lot of time thinking about Fire Emblem 4 lately. In particular, I've been examining some of the popular and unpopular pairings when it comes to forging child soldiers for Generation 2. I've previously said that the pairing aspect is not especially interesting to me, as most units have a single slam dunk parent and everything else is kind of a downgrade, but I feel that that is a bit of an exaggeration, perhaps. Lachesis and Beowulf feels like the only pairing where if you are doing something other than it, you are strictly suboptimal, with every other mother having at least 2 good pairings and several that can make for fun memes. As such, I wanted to examine who I believe to be the most interesting pairing exercise, and that is Erinys. Erinys gives birth to 2 children, Fee, the early game Pegasus Knight, and Sed, the late game pre-promoted Sage. On the surface, these appear to be children who want very different things from their father. One is a physical unit, and the other one is a magical unit. As such, I have often heard it bandied about that you choose one of the 2 to bolster, and the other one kind of gets shafted. Since Sed is pretty good on his own, it is often proposed that you give a physical father to Erin in order to bolster up Fee and salvage her, as she can struggle without the help. And while it is certainly true that inheritance from a Christmas Cavalier or the Nihil skill to help fight bows or the Overkill strength growth and Paragon of Flex can be enough to prevent Fee from being the worst unit in your team, I generally don't think they're going to turn her into a combat god, and so you'll end up having done a pairing just to create a middling flyer. Now, in any other game, a middling flyer is actually pretty good, but this is Fire Emblem 4, where horses are king, and being unable to take advantage of road tiles actually hurts Fee's ability to participate in combat. As such, I find that the best usage of Fee in Generation 2 is side objectives. On most maps, there is a village that she can help out, and she has the stats to deal with the brigand who is threatening it. It's not much, but it's honest work. Her flight is also very useful in Chapter 7 thanks to the desert as well as the rivers that need to be crossed, and she can be useful for both of those. But crucially, these are all roles that can be done regardless of how well your Fee's stats hold up. I mean, in 0% growths, I had Femina do basically everything Fee would do, and Femina is a garbage combat unit who doesn't even get pursuit. So I don't think investing in a physical dad to help out Fee is actually worthwhile, especially since the idea that Sed doesn't actually benefit from a magical dad is a little bit of an exaggeration. While it's true that his combat will be phenomenal regardless of who sires him, he definitely wants to have a magical dad for a higher magical growth, and that is because the magic stat is also relevant for his staff utility, specifically the silence staff or sleep staff if you're based on Ishtar. Ishtar is an incredibly threatening boss who appears in multiple chapters, 8, 10, and Endgame to be specific, and in Endgame silencing her is a huge help to your team. After all, she has 30 magic, 40 speed, a holy weapon, adept, and vantage. It is very difficult to find a unit who is not potentially risking a 1 round from her, and it's equally difficult to find someone who can 1 round her themselves. And that's not even mentioning the fact that she shows up at a time when you are crammed in a hallway and have to deal with some other very tough bosses, the Triangle Attack Falcon Knights. While silencing her is by no means necessary, it is extraordinarily helpful, and it is a job that only Sed or Hawk can do. So let's take a look at that threshold. She has the barrier ring, which means that she will have extra resistance, but this can be cancelled out by having your staffer hold the magic ring. This means that in order to beat her 27 resistance, you need to have 28 magic without the help of the magic ring, since you are unable to stack 2 of them in Fire Emblem 4. A physical Sed is simply never coming close to reaching this threshold. Looking at the common suggested fathers for a physical Erin, we can see that Lex, Noish, and Alec all fall at least 10 points short of the 28 magic threshold. As such, if we care about silencing Ishtar, we definitely want a magical dad. Although it's also worth noting that even without wanting to silence Ishtar, the combat on physical dad Sed is pretty cheeks. It's serviceable thanks to the fact that he has pretty good bases and access to the light tome, but it's never going to blow your socks out of the water, and for a unit who doesn't have a horse, you kind of want combat that is worth dragging their low move ass around. Having settled for a magical father, let's take a look at the canonical husband of Erin, and that is Lewin. Lewin doesn't actually offer the overkill magic you might expect him to. A 21 base and 35% growth certainly is better than Lex's 10% growth and 16 base, but it's still not something that I would necessarily consider worth dragging a footy around for. That is, if it weren't for Lewin's other gift to his son, the Tome for Sety. It's a 30 might tome that gives significant bonuses to speed on top of the already bonkers speed growth that a Lewin Sed will have, guaranteeing that he will double and annihilate anything he sets his eyes on, as well as making him incredibly dodgy and surprisingly tanky for a magical unit. It's very expensive to maintain if all you're doing is firing away Sety, but if you use Light as your default tome and whip out Sety for emergencies, then it's much more manageable, or you can decide to give Sed the Thief Band or just give a bunch of patty gold dumps to him and he's set to go. There's the obvious opportunity cost of not getting Sety on Arthur, who joins much earlier and has a horse, but if we ignore that, then Sety Sed is a decent option for combat, but he's not going to hit that all-important silencing Ishtar threshold very reliably. If raised to level 30 by endgame, which I do not think is an unreasonable thing to do, an average Sed will be 2 points short of the coveted 28 magic. This can be patched up using a tinny marriage, which is not an especially competitive resource and I think generally should be assumed to go to Sed or Hawk, but this still leaves a Lewin Sed in a very precarious position, and he is subject to RNG screw, stopping him from fulfilling what I would say is his most important role in the game. Tinny only gives him 3 points of magic, which means he will be 1 ahead of the coveted 28 at 29. If he misses more than 1 point of expected magic growth, he will not be able to silence Ishtar. I would generally refer to a Lewin Sed as workable, but typically not worth the opportunity cost of Arthur Sed, and even if you don't care about that, subject to RNG screw for his most important job, and more reliant on money help than other variants, which can screw over some of the other money-hungry units. In particular, Eris suffers from this. It's better than the physical versions, but I do believe that it is worse than the other 2 magical versions, each of which have their own benefits and downsides. Next is Claude. Claude offers a 45% magic growth and a base of 22, which is very nice. He has a lower speed growth than a Lewin Sed would, but he actually has a higher speed base, meaning that he will perform better at pace, and generally speaking, they are going to cap their speed at around the same time. I think throughout the course of the playthrough, Claude Sed is usually going to be ahead in speed up until the point then they cap, in which case they will both be capped, and then it doesn't really matter that you have a higher speed growth on Lewin Sed. 2 big tools that you lose are access to the critical skill and access to the Sety tome. In general, I don't think the critical skill actually adds that much for Sed, as he's not really relying on crits to kill, especially not when he has the higher magic growth that Claude provides, but Sety is a little bit disappointing to not have. The overkill speed does mean that a Lewin Sed is better able to dodge than a Claude Sed, but a Claude Sed is still plenty fine as an enemy phase unit. After all, he's still going to be pretty fast, and he is still going to be bulky because FE4 just gives everyone incredibly high HP stats. The higher magic growth means that on average, at level 27, Sed will reach the 28 magic threshold, and he will cap his magic on average by level 30, which is very nice. While it does mean on average he's going to have more magic than you need for the silencing roll, it means that he's basically RNG proof, as he can get the +3 from a tinny marriage. He would have to be 6 points behind on magic in order to not be able to fix this with a tinny marriage, and I think that that is fairly unlikely to happen. It's possible, sure, but it's still significantly less likely than getting RNG screwed out of a Lewin Sed being able to do so. It's also worth noting that due to a lack of reliance on Sety, a Claude Sed is more able to make do without gold dumps and the Thief Band, or he can leverage the gold dumps and Thief Bands into repairing expensive salves such as Sleep and Silence in order to make use of them more often during the course of your playthrough. While the endgame Ishtar benchmark is, in my opinion, the most important silencing threshold to reach, she's not the only threatening magical enemy who you might want to silence, and she's definitely not the only threatening enemy you might want to put to sleep. Having the freedom to do this without sacrificing gold you might need to repair a holy weapon is very nice, and while technically Claude passes down a holy weapon in the Bragi staff, I think that is a much lesser demand. because if you're playing properly, you probably don't need to use it anyway. It is also worth remembering that both Claude and Lewin can pass staves down to Sety, which is really nice because it saves him money of having to purchase them himself. And it can be extremely funny if you manage to get the sleep staff onto him, because as a green unit, he will put wyverns to sleep every single turn with infinite durability sleep staffs. The reason I bring up staff inheritance, even though it is something that both of these dads share, is that the next magical dad does not, and that is Azelle, and he might actually be the best father for Sety. On average, he reaches magic of 28 by level 25, and it can do so even faster if you give him the tinny marriage, effectively making him even more RNG proof than a Claude Lewin would be. Additionally, he has 27 base speed with a 65% growth, meaning that he will cap it very, very quickly. So his combat is going to be better or on par with that of all other Seds at any point in the game, with the exception of Lewin Sety using for Sety specifically, and as we went over earlier, that's going to cause some money problems. Now, on the topic of money problems, it is definitely a little bit awkward that he can't inherit any staves from his dad, and it does mean that he's probably going to need the Thief Band or some dumps from Patty or Daisy. But it's not the end of the world, and he will clear the arena very easily, so it's not like he's going to be broke. It's just a little bit more expensive to get him and maintain the staves that you want for utility. So those are the upsides and downsides to the various magical dads for Sety, but I do want to talk about the fourth as of yet unmentioned option, and that is if you fucking murder Erin in Generation 1, you get Hawk, who is generally not going to be as good as Sety at combat. You know, he can't get the overkill for Sety. He's going to struggle with money in the ways that Lewin and Azelle's sons would as well, but without any of the upside, and his magic growth is kind of stinky. However, he does have the distinct upside of being 100% RNG proof in his attempt to silence Ishtar, as he is able to get magic from his secret event as well as tinny marriage, which will push him to that 28 threshold, which is what he needs, equipped with a magic ring in order to silence Ishtar. Overall, I think this is generally worse than a magical dad said, although notably better than a physical dad said, but it is an option worth considering if you are doing an Iron Man playthrough. If the only thing you care about is the ability to silence Ishtar, this gives you a guaranteed 100% reliable way to do so, and I think that that's really nice and at the very least worth a shout out. Of course, this does give us the notable downside of getting Femina instead of Fee, and Femina is just about in every single way the worst unit. She doesn't even have Pursuit, which is something that Fee gets by default no matter who her dad is. That said, if we're just using Fee for various flyer utilities such as rescuing the Thief Band village or baiting some people around while Leaf is doing his training arc, then Femina can do the flyer utility stuff just about as well as Fee. And that's kind of the conclusion we came to, right? Like, I'm definitely not just going to pull a gotcha on you and explain about how a magical dad is actually going to make Fee her best self, right? Don't look at the video length. The video is almost over, I promise. We're on the concluding thoughts portion. Except for surprise! Femina is significantly worse than Fee, because if you give Fee a magical dad, then magical Fee can actually do things that are worth doing. I know, I fooled you. I'm so clever like that. The thing is that while Pegasus Knights are commonly known as lance units, Fee actually has both lances and swords at base, and it's the swords that I want to focus on, because there are multiple magical swords in the game, which Fee can use to leverage enemies' non-existent resistance stats. While it's true that Pegasus Knight doesn't have great base magic, with only 1 or 2 depending on who the father is, you can easily pass down a magic ring in order to bolster that to 5, and then use the Light Brand or Wind Sword to one-round most enemies. After all, when used at 2 range, any magical sword will cast a 14 Might Tome, and since you're doubling and hitting on resistance, it's generally going to lead to a 1 round, and it's better than you can expect a physical Fee to perform. This becomes even more relevant once she reaches the Falco Knight promotion, as she will gain a whopping +7 magic on this promotion, compared to her +0 strength. If you want to turn Fee into a combat god, the Wind Sword is going to do a much better job of that than the Brave Lance ever could hope to. If we take a look again at the magical dads, here is where Lewin really starts to lose his claim to an Erinys marriage. He only provides Fee with a 25% magic growth, meaning she is just as bad at her magic growth as she is at her strength growth, and her strength growth is not something that I generally hear emphasized as a good part of her kit. While her speed growth does rise to a whopping 75%, speed is the one area in which she is not lacking regardless of who her father is. Critical and Adept are decent additions, especially to go along with the overkill speed growth, but generally I prefer reliability over RNG. Still, it is undeniably a thing that she can do and a way she can secure kills, and honestly probably makes her better at combat than Claude feat would be. After all, he only provides a 30% magic growth, so it's only technically better than Lewin, but functionally they feel basically the same, especially when you factor in the fact that he gives less speed growth. And I don't think the extra speed from Lewin is especially relevant, but it is something that is nice to have and can potentially allow her to double faster enemies, such as late game sword masters. No, the big benefit from a Claude Fee is that she becomes a utility unit. She is able to gain B staves off of this, meaning she is a mounted physics staff user. She's going to be worse at this job in basically every way than Leaf could be, but she is one of only 2 units who can use B rank staffs while on a mount, so it's not nothing. The biggest tragedy though is that she's unable to hit A for rescue, so you can't do any flying rescue maneuvers, which could be fun and potentially useful for chapters like 10 with the mountains and whatnot. Overall, definitely not the ideal Fee, but I still think it's better than physical Fee because, you know, a flying physic bot is a flying physic bot. However, I think that pretty definitively the best father for Fee is Azelle. He passes on a 45% magic growth and a 55% speed growth, which is phenomenal. The lack of skills is, of course, a little bit disappointing, but I do think the raw stats make up for it. And if you really want to get criticals using Fee, then you can just build up kills on the light brand in Generation 1. It's not an especially hard thing to do, especially if you allow Ethlyn to do combat. So overall, where does that put my recommendations for Erin pairings? Well, it should come as no surprise that I think the very best one is Azelle Erin. This simply gives us the best magical combat Fee, as well as the lowest chance of getting RNG screwed out of being able to silence Ishtar. Sed might struggle a little bit for staff money, but his combat is still going to be top tier, so between the arena and the potential for some gold favoritism, I think that he'll be able to make do even if he doesn't end up the elite stat bot that a Claude Sed would. Speaking of Claude, I think he's the second best husband for Erin. He doesn't offer anything especially unique for Sed, but does make money problems less of an issue through inheritance and the lack of reliance on Sety. It's nothing especially flashy, but it is definitely helpful. Erin, on the other hand, will be okay for a chapter and a half, and then kind of plummet into not really being a combat unit anymore. That said, the B rank staves is definitely a niche, and it's a good one. Physic on a flyer is very nice to have, especially if you are using Leaf for rescue every turn. In this role, however, she does just kind of become a worse version of Leaf who is also incapable of doing combat, so if your team is in the market for that, it's definitely good, but she could be doing so much better if she was Azelle's child, or even Lewin's. Speaking of Lewin, I do think that he is sort of the third place candidate for Erin's husband, which is sad because he is canonically her husband in Thracia. Even ignoring the opportunity cost of not being able to get a Sety Arthur, Sety Sed just isn't that great. The extra might from the tome mostly just serves to make up for the significantly lower starting magic, and he never fully catches up with the alt-universe versions of himself. He also just kind of combines the problems that you get from both Azelle and Claude's sons. He still has money problems like Azelle would, but doesn't have the RNG-proof security that Azelle has to go along with that. And while it's undeniable that a Lewin Fee is a better user of a magic sword than a Claude Fee, you are still fishing for adepts and crits in order to secure kills, and in that case I would kind of just rather have Azelle Fee for the better stats to secure kills. After all, Claude Fee may not be able to kill people at all, but I would still prefer the utility of B-rank staves to the unreliability of fishing for crits. Last but not least is Hawk, and it hurts for me to put him this low because I have been an advocate that Hawk is better than Sed, but I need to face the music and just say that my boy is not up to snuff. It is undeniably nice that he hits the silence threshold with no RNG, but he combines the money problems that Azelle has with the kind of stinky combat of a non-Force Sety Lewin, and just you end up with the worst possible version of a passable sage. It might have a niche in Iron Man's if you are really worried about silencing Ishtar, but otherwise I think he's mostly worth the skip, especially since he comes with Femina, and Femina is just flyer utility, when a magical fee could be so much more as either a utility unit or a combat unit. Still, I do think that the combination of Femina and Hawk is better than having a physical unit marry Erin, as then you end up with a mediocre Pegasus for Fee, who is undeniably better than Femina, but probably not better enough to actually do combat, and a pretty terrible Sed. And I know there's a narrative that you can't really mess up Sed, so you might as well invest in Fee, but that's just not the case. You absolutely can screw up Sed, and not just from the silencing threshold. A low magic sage is still not phenomenal. It's good, but it's not worth dragging him along when he doesn't have a horse. I also just challenge the assumption that a physical father is helping Fee more than a magical one would, and I'm hoping that this video did a good job of demonstrating that magical Fee is just better than physical Fee in most situations. That said, at the end of the day, Fire Emblem 4 is not so difficult a game that you need to do optimal pairings or even good pairings to complete it. If you want to meme around with weird pairings like do Erin or whatnot, feel free. It's your game, you play it how you want. But let me know what you think about the best husband for Erin. Do you agree? Disagree? Did I miss some secret Arden tech? Let's discuss it in the comments, or even better, in the Discord, which should be linked in the description unless I forgot to include the link because I'm kind of dumb. This video is made possible by my patrons, so I would like to give a very special thank you to Thick Molder, Maren Karen, and Jamie Collins for supporting me in making these videos. If you are interested in supporting the channel or just want to check out the benefits that I offer, the Patreon link is also in the description, but please only join if you can afford to do so comfortably. Regardless, have a wonderful day and take care.